Hello, people. This week, I read The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I I know nothing about this book. I feel like I've heard about it like as a movie or something, but I've never seen the movie. I had never read the book. But somehow, and I actually don't remember how, I got this book for free off of Apple's whatever their version of Kindle is, their equivalent. I don't know what it's called, Apple Books or whatever they call it. Because I have ye old iPad, so I have access to it. And I gotta say, if I don't know I don't know what other ways there are to access this app, but if you can get it, and they give you some free books, get this version of this book by Karen Gillan of Ye Old Marvel fame. Read this book, narrated it. Very good job. So I got it for free, right? But I think it's also one of these in the public domain books. It's considered a classic, so I'm assuming you can find it other places for, the low price of free as well. But I'm not 100% sure on that. In any case, it's not that long of a read. I'd give it a 3 out of 5 as far as sort of classics go. It's not grand enough in a kind of way to pull you off of what you're already reading. But if you have a little window and you want something just to change of pace, like a palate cleanser maybe, this is a great book to read. It's very fun. Heartwarming, I would say. Now, it starts off a little bit sideways because, now again, it was written all those years ago, and everyone has different verbiages. But when you when you start off calling a kid having a thin little face and a little thin body and a sour expression, right? They dog this kid the way they describe her. And I'm at first, it's sort of shocking. We are in a modern age, you don't call kids these kind of these kind of names. But I think that's something to do with the age. And I get a sense of it better by the end of the book, right? In totality. So as one-offs, as snippets, sounds fairly bad. She's apparently a British kid in India. And it says, her dad's always busy, and her mom, it says, quote, didn't really want her. So she just goes to parties and basically ignores her own kid. And I'm like, this is really a rough start for this kid. And then, of course, it gets rougher. As tyrannical and selfish a little pig as ever lived. And I'm like, Jesus, you can't call a child a pig, bro. So, she's about 9. We're like 2 pages in, okay? She's about 9 years old when ye old cholera hits. And, cholera could kill you. Cholera was killing a lot of people back in the day. Nasty bit of business. And so it's from her perspective-ish, right? Where she doesn't know what's happening. She's mad no one's around. She's sure everyone forgot her. She drinks, I think, a little wine left out, and then, sort of goes to sleep. Wakes up. Everyone's dead. Her Indian, caretaker, dead. Her parents, dead. A bunch of the servants, dead. Everyone wiped out. The people looking over the scene, essentially, some other British guys are shocked to even find her. They're like, oh my God, they forgot a kid here. No one knew she was there. And then, this is pretty rough. You can't just start with, everyone dead with cholera. And that's how we're starting. She goes from there, and she's with some other British people before she gets sent back to England. And they're sort of just matter of fact about it, which I guess it still seems kind of rough, but I guess it was, back in the day. But I'm like, that's pretty rough. You know, because they talk a lot about how she's full of herself. She's not nice to anyone. But I'm sitting here and I'm like, how the crap am I supposed to act as a kid if I'm 9 years old? No one's ever been disagreeable with me. My parents don't hang out with me, and now everyone I know died of cholera. You know, like how am I supposed to be? How adjusted am I supposed to be? But you know, these are modern thoughts. The pace of it, you feel like the audience back then let the water boil a little more, so to speak. There's a chapter called Mistress Mary Quite Contrary. I think this is a famous line from the book. I know that the author loved this line, this little bit of rhyming, because she used it for a couple of chapters and real intently, right? Like, I like the sound of this verbiage. You know, she doesn't go back to it, and the author doesn't lean on it too much, right? You know, for a chapter or two, she's really intent about it. But, you know, by the end, it's not that big a deal. It's more along the lines of some character development. She goes from whatever this interperiod to actually sent to England so from India to her uncle Archibald Craven, great name, Archibald, and Misselthwaite Manor. I think I said that right. I'm not exactly sure. Karen Gillan said it dead on, but she's actually like British, so she has an advantage. A 600-year-old house on the edge of a moor. Now we learn old Archibald Craven's wife died. He hasn't really recovered. He's a bit of a hunchback, which again, I feel like back in the day, 1800s or whatever, they would sort of judge you on your looks. Now, we judge people on their looks today as well, but it's not like if you had a doctor who was a hunchback, you'd be like, he can't operate on me. He's clearly a hunchback. He won't know what he's doing, right? We trust that a professional is a professional. You know, and it seems that looks may be more or less consigned to relationships and attractiveness, right? You can't help who you're attracted to and not attracted to. So we don't overtly judge people that way. But we're not I'm like, he's an accountant, but he's missing an eye, you know. There's going to be some on the fringes, but it seemed more widespread in the 1800s. And you get this, I was reading a biography, and you're hearing from Wilhelmina, Frederick the Great's sister. And she's just an example now, but a bunch of people in that era did this in their descriptions of people. It's the initial meeting of them is very important because you want to get across. And again, you wouldn't write this in a biography if you didn't think the people who are going to read it are interested in it, right? So you really get across the cut of the person. He stands very strong and straight. And he's broad and muscular, and he looks healthy, but he has a lazy eye. So you wonder how far he could have got if he didn't have this lazy eye. Like, the physical is a manifestation of some internal deficiencies, right? That's what I get a lot from the 1800s. And of course, people would want to read it and go, oh, such a shame, or he overcame that lazy eye somehow, right? I get this sense a lot. And I get that sense in this story because he married some pretty lady that no one thought would be with him because he was a hunchback. And then, of course, she dies and he couldn't recover. It's almost like it excuses it. So if you were strong and tall, you wouldn't get the excuse of feeling bad that your whole family died of cholera or something. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense, but people do stuff that doesn't make sense, right? But you get that sense of the time in the story, even apart from what's actually happening in the story. So, there's more worth than just the actions. Just in any writing from that old a time. That's why it's sort of fun. we meet Martha. She's the housemaid. This is a good, solid, salt of the earth kind of a person. It's, what is it? We're thankful Clark Kent landed in Kentucky and got raised by some honest American farmers, because then he's able to save the world because he has these right morals inside of him, right? I think it's the same. It's the same but British. This Yorkshire girl. She's honest. She's caring. The Karen Gillan reading it wonderfully, which if you look at the print version, right, the actual book, it's one of these where we try and show the dialect and the writing, so it can be a little bit tricky to read that bit. But I don't think it's too much of a hurdle. Just know that going in. But the audiobook's that's not a problem, because professionals reading it. But there's Martha dealing with her. And this girl's 10 years old and doesn't know how to dress herself. And so, without being overbearing or ridiculing or a tyrant or anything like this Martha girl sort of just talks to her like a human. Human to human. You're sort of happy that she's around this type of a person, right? You like Martha. Martha's great. I know they call the Indians the blacks. It's just a term of dark skin. It's one of these books that'll say queer, as in he's weird, but it's because they didn't have that as a word for gay people yet. This sort of verbiage happens. Don't let it shock you if you see it in a book. I remember the first time. I think it was The Hobbit. It was The Hobbit, or I think it was Lord of the Rings. When they were sitting there, and Bilbo's like, yeah, I mean, this is the best weed in the South Farthing, right? And I'm like, I don't know how old I am. I'm young. But we grew up with, just say no to drugs and this, these after school, programs so that you wouldn't do drugs or whatever. And to have a book just sit there and say, we're doing weed. We're smoking weed. And I'm like, bro, Gandalf is tripping. Now, obviously, you get a sense that it's not hippie weed. You figure it out. But it's the same here. If you see these kind of verbiages, don't latch on to them too hard, right? There's a part, and it says it more than once, where our Mary just flat says, she's lonely. No one remembers her. And that's just hard, right? It's hard to hear from a 10-year-old kid, I'm lonely, right? It's hard to hear from anybody, but just a kid. It's just, you really start to feel for this kid and this setup she's been stuck in, right? And on the whole, right, so the book seems to chide her a little bit for her attitude, for the way she, deals with people. But if she's been raised in India, and a little side note on the culture of India, back in the 1800s, they had a weird caste system, right? So if I'm a servant, my kids are going to be servants, my parents were, etc., right? So you really sink into the servitude, right? And if this little kid is your charge, you just do whatever she says. You never tell her no. So I'm like, again, how's a kid supposed to act if everyone around him just treats him like royalty? But then you add to it, here's a kid who, her whole family's died. She grew up in India, and now she had to move from India to England, where she didn't know anybody. That's a lot to take in. And in the midst of this, she doesn't lose her curiosity. She asks questions. She's curious. She hears this Yorkshire accent and tries to pick up on it, because in India, that's a sign of you care, that I'm trying to learn your dialect, right? So she even still cares about other people. She's open, to new things. That's a lot. To me, that's a lot to have to show, and it There's a quite resolve in this little kid, commendable even. So she roams around. She can go wherever she wants, but she has to go by herself. She's looking around. She meets a robin. A robin chirps at her. She's happy to see it because, it's something to do. She makes like a rapport with the bird. But it got me to thinking because bird watching is one of my favorite hobbies. It's way funner than you think. If you just grab yourself a pair of lenses, right? I think you can get some solid lenses. Mine, only like $100. And just, look around, even in cities, even if there's just pigeons, you'd be surprised. There's a personality that comes across when you bird watching. These little birds have personality, and it ends up very fun. So I was very happy that the kid's into some bird watching. We get various descriptions of the moor, of the garden, of the house, all these sort of things, right? But it's all through sort of this lens on this character. It's a great way to not have your readers bored of, just pure descriptions, which can happen in books. I think we've all read some books like that. Don't ever forget. You don't need it super long a book, but even in a long book, if you don't forget your characters and that it's not anything special. Moore isn't anything special. It's her reaction to it, right? It's what she gets out of it. And so even the long descriptions don't bore me. This robin, now at first it seems natural enough, but by the end you sort of see, in thinking back, the magic sort of building. This robin chirps around and leads her to a key. Right? So she finds an old rusty key, and we're assuming it's going to be getting her into the garden that we've been hyping up. The Martha girl and her mom buy her a jumping rope. And again, they have 12 kids, 14 kids. There's never enough money if you got that many kids. They're servants. They're not rich to begin with. And they thought of her, and they're like, she got nothing to do. Let's get her a jumping rope. 1800s had to have been boring if you're a kid. At 12, my bestest toy is a jump rope. Not much happened. In any case, it's the thought that counts. And that's a real thought. For and you always find this. You always find good, honest, solid people just doing good people stuff, right? And it always hits you right in the feels. And again, side note, for a world for the world the way it is, sometimes it's fun to take a break and read a book that's just sort of sweet, right? This is just a sweet, wholesome little book. And it's fun to move through it. We meet Dickens. He's 12, he's 14, he's also another kid. Works around the place, and he's this weird, he's a special kind of like animal whisperer. He has like a pet fox that hangs out with him. All the animals like him. They all know him. He talks to him. And when in first reading, that's where the magic, I start to feel like the magic, slowly gathering around me. Because, what kind of kid can just, make a robin land on his finger? It's rare. But if you're more like he's some kind of spirit, right? He's the spirit of something, you get more. Or at least a sense of something. He's a real person in the story. But you get a great sense that, something's happening here. Because there's a lot of bad elements, right? She starts working around in the garden. She starts working in the garden. One day, Mr. Craven shows up. And again, this tugs at you too. He seems very severe to her, right? A big, scary authority figure. And so she's constantly like pleading her case. And he's constantly like, don't be afraid. Nothing's going to happen. It's okay. He's aware. He's aware of the bad job that he's doing, right? He knows he should have spent more time with this person. He just knows that he also can't. He still hasn't recovered from his wife dying. But they never, they let you feel that more than harp on it, right? So you really feel it from the character. And then his interactions with this kid, you like him. He's not a bad guy. He just hadn't got it together yet, right? It's one of these situations. And so it's one of those you see from afar and I can't help the cause, but my heart wants it fixed. It's one of these kind of things. He says, I'm too ill, wretched, and distracted to be the guardian that they need. I'm like, when you say it about yourself, right? It's like, I'm too broken to help. You're like, oh, I want more for those people. So the girl, our Miss Mary, says, don't give me a governess. A governess is like a personalized teacher. Eats up a lot of your day. She didn't want her day eaten up. She's only he's like, you won't, it's okay. But what do you want to do for fun? I can bring you books, toys, needlework, whatever, You don't have to worry. That's what he keeps saying. That he goes, you're a 10-year-old child. There's nothing you can break. So don't worry so much. Very sweet. She says, can I have a bit of earth? And it you can see that it hits the guy. He says, you remind me, what does it say? You remind me of someone else who loved the earth and things that grow. It's just him. I'm like, you can almost see this guy just standing, trying to deal with these emotions. But he's happy. He's happy that here's another sort of, it's his wife. It's the dead wife who loved to grow things. You just know it, right? So he's happy that here's another someone who likes the same things. It's like that person's still alive, right? Which I guess is sort of the magic floating around. Never said, just let you feel it. He's like, whatever. If you want to, whatever dirt you want to take for any reason, you go to town. Right? So then he leaves. We get sort of noises in a corridor. And there's another thing. She's sure she hears someone scream, yelling. But they say, don't worry about it, it's the wind. But even with everything that's happened, even with the changeover in her whole entire life, she has the self-confidence to say, no, I know what I heard. I know I heard somebody, yelling. I'm going to go figure it out. Even with everyone telling me that it's not the case. It's an admirable little kid. Eventually, she finds in all these massive rooms, the source, it's a kid. Colin Craven. That's the son of her uncle being, the Craven we just talked about. And he just laid up in a bed. He's just laid up in a bed like a cripple. And again, you start to feel for this kid real quick too. He's like a little emperor. That's how he acts. Very imperious. Everyone has to do what I say all the time. Come here. This kind of way. Everyone gives me my way all the time. But it's because I'm going to die. And you're like, again, you don't want to hear a kid saying, don't worry about it, I'm probably going to die soon anyway, right? Automatically tugs at your heartstrings. Again, if everyone's going to tell you what to do, you see why the kid acts like as snootish as he looks. You see why he acts like such a little snob, a little tyrant. The servants are like, this kid's just been walking all over people. But the other one's like, yeah, but I would take all of that if he would just get better, right? So even these people, you don't feel too bad because they all want the same thing. They all want this kid to get better. It's just, they don't know how. And if you have, again, it's the 1800s. I don't want to make him too excitable. I don't want to make him too mad. Anything could make his heart stop or whatever. They don't know. But the kid sits there and he's terrified because he heard his dad talking over him once. Obviously, you assuming this lady, the man's wife, dies in childbirth. And so this guy's real tore up about it. And it's going sideways for the kid because he's getting some of that resistance, right? But the guy's just like, doesn't want his kid to be a hunchback like him. And so the kid just lays down all the time because he's sure if he bends too much, he'll get a hunchback. These kind of things. He's wheeled around in a little chair. And then people stare at him. And then he's like, I don't like people staring at me. So he just stays in his room all the time. And that's the other part where you're like, what is it? The doctor recommends, fresh air and sunlight. You need to get out and about sometimes to heal up. And sort of this is what this garden ends up doing. It's these gulp in the fresh air. Heal yourself, right? So him and this girl, Mary, start hanging out. She has her secret garden. Eventually he gets in on the secret. Very excited about this garden. He likes that it's secret. We all do. We like it for these kids the same as these servants, that they have something, that they can go to, something rewarding. She keeps talking about, she works in the garden, she's getting fatter. And at first I'm like, you can't call it fat, but then you see it's their way of saying, meat on your bones, you're healthier. And that if you can keep this activity, they didn't want they're kids, and you're like, oh, they were depressed. They didn't want to eat, and of course you can't force feed them because you think you'll kill them or something. So we're these gaunt little kids. They're starting to eat better. They're starting to be out in the garden. The doctor is supposed to inherit the manor if the kid dies. So for a second, I got this real worry that he's not going to let the kid go out, right? That he's going to say no because that'll, make him, stay weak and maybe die, and then I'll inherit all these things. But it says, flat. Even though he could have gained off of this, he's not a bad person. He's not that kind of a monster. And so he's a professional and says, no, that's right, you can go out. And, he ends up happy that the kid's doing well. And some of it's like, oh my God, how many modern books is it that I read that I just assume instantly it's going to be some horrible conniving thing that has to happen. Like, why can't everyone just sort of be nice? And then sort of good can come of that. They're in maintaining the garden. The kid's getting healthier. They wheel him around, but there's nothing actually wrong with his legs. But no one wanted to say anything because you just assume a kid that's getting wheeled around has messed up legs. But again, when he grows up, he'll be in charge of the whole manor. So you got to treat him a little different. So at some point, someone's giving him the business. A salty old gardener is giving him the business. And he stands up and walks to him, right? You feel real great. You feel great that this kid's walking. And Mary is like praying almost that he doesn't fall over because it'll mess up his little confidence, right? He didn't fall over. He just walks around. I'm like, oh, right, my legs just for work. They have worked all the time. And they have a lot of fun. Again, they're 10-year-old. They have a lot of fun concocting ways to make sure they maintain the secretness of their garden. And if somebody finds out that they're brought into the fold and you have to be secretive with us, this kind of thing. So it's fun little bits there. The magic eventually reaches our Mr. Craven. He's somewhere in Switzerland doing something. I don't know what he does, geology or whatever it is. He's making it happen in Switzerland by himself. And he ends up with some kind of dream or something. Some kind of dream that's just, it's like his wife or something to this effect. It's one of these heavy dreams and tells him, in the garden. Wakes up the next day, he has a note from Martha who's like, I know I shouldn't write to you, but And I don't want to say it, and it's not my place, but I think you should come home, and I think you'd like it. So then he's like, I better go home. He gets home. He's thinking about how to get into this garden because the key got buried. He's not sure if he remembers how. And then he overhears someone say they're in the garden. Those words, play on him. And then he goes in and he sees this great garden. He sees the girl looking healthier. He sees his son walking around. And it ends, with that. With him and his son smiling in the sun, walking around. And I'm like, this is it. That's it. That's all the book. It's just, what did they say when they give you some sort of puppy or some kittens and they're like, here, just to make your timeline a little happier on Twitter. That's what this book is. It's just heartwarming. It's just pleasant. You're just happy. And, you don't have to deal with any kind of atrocity other than sort of the natural ones that come with life. And then it's how do you deal with this? How do you overcome these things, And that's all that happens. And it's wonderful. I'm very happy I read it. I'm very happy I own it. All right. Ad time. These are my books. I don't ask, you can if you want to subscribe. You can subscribe, but I don't ask every episode for people to subscribe. I sell them swag in the form of books that I've written. So if you want to help the channel, buy a book. If you just want to watch, enjoy. I'm fine either way. I'm happy. I'm going to read these books anyway, right? Might as well yap about them somewhere. And that somewhere's here. And that someone's to you. So you kind of already did your job. Okay, people. I will see you lovely lot next week.